Shalom. This is the third YouTube in the series dealing with Russia, Ukraine, Crimea, Poland, and other countries. And just very simply to encapsulate some of the things in the previous two YouTubes, I was talking about how I think I have a very special insight into what is happening in Eastern Europe today because of my father's family that came from the Ukraine and my mother's family that came from Poland. And what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the history of Eastern Europe, I would say as of the 1500s, 1600s. And here now we're going to talk about Islam, we're going to talk about the Turks, Circassians, Chechens, and Tatars. These are different nations, different tribes, Turkic nations, which opposed the Polish, the Ukrainians, and the Russians for hundreds of years. And there are many wars, like I said before, that most Americans do not have a clue about. I'm going to go off to Spain for a moment in order to make a certain point. You know, I was born and raised in America, which I say is the greatest country on earth. It has its faults with its leadership, but it is a great country. But one of the faults of America is that Americans really are not taught the overall picture. I remember as a high school student in New York that we were taken on a field trip to see Man of La Mancha. And Man of La Mancha is a very, very popular Broadway show, became a movie also, Hollywood movie, about Don Quixote. Don Quixote was a Spaniard who was protesting against the corruption of Spanish society at that time, which was around 1600s. And basically, we were taught in high school that this was a spoof on the aristocracy of Spain and on chivalry and knighthood. But what most Americans don't know is that Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote Man of La Mancha, who wrote Don Quixote de la Mancha, lost his right arm fighting in the Battle of Lepanto. Lepanto in 1571 was a battle in which the Spanish Catholic fleet defeated the Turkish Islamic fleet, basically broke the back of Islamic sovereignty over the Mediterranean. We mustn't forget that in 1492, when the Catholic king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, expelled the Jews and the Muslims from Spain. Of course, this is seen as a major Holocaust by Jews and Muslims. But they did it because in 1492, Spain was bracing for a fourth Islamic invasion from the Turks. The Turks, by 1492, controlled the entire Mediterranean basin. When I say Mediterranean basin, it not only means Spain and Portugal and France and Italy, North Africa, it also includes Russia, Crimea, Ukraine, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, all the way to the gates of Vienna. The Turkish armies were at the gates of Vienna in this time. And the Spanish, of course, were Catholic, and the Austrians, who were Catholic, were intermarrying. The royal houses had intermarried and mixed. And so what we see here is a multi-front war with the Turks. So Miguel de Cervantes loses his right arm in battle against the Turks in 1571 at the Battle of Lepanto, and then he's talking about how the Spanish in the 1600s are forgetting their knighthood and their chivalry in the Crusades, fighting against the Muslims. Now, why am I telling you about Spain? We're supposed to be talking about Russia, because the same was happening in Russia, Ukraine, and Poland at this time. Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, what is known as Yugoslavia, Serbia, Bosnia, these countries were brought under Turkish rule. Hungary was under Turkish rule for 150 years. We're talking about centuries and centuries of battles. I had the opportunity once to take a train from Vienna to Warsaw, Poland, Vienna, Austria, and the train was called Jan Sobieski. Jan Sobieski, I didn't know this until I took the train, was the king of Poland who saved Vienna from the Turks. In 1683, Jan Sobieski came down with his Polish army, together with German barons and their armies, and defeated the Turks once and for all. The Turks had been besieging Vienna for 200 years, And finally, this broke the back of the Turkish military, and this began the withdrawal of Turkey from the European continent. Today, Turkey officially has a bridgehead just across the Bosphorus from Istanbul, which was known as Constantinople at the time, Byzantium. But there was a time that the Turks literally controlled Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, Ukraine. And the church, the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church were mobilizing the people to fight the Turks. 1648 arises a leader in Ukraine by the name of Khmelnytsky. Khmelnytsky, of course, for most Americans, their eyes are going to glaze over with a name like Khmelnytsky. But Khmelnytsky was the George Washington of the Ukrainian nationalist movement. And what he did was he massacred the Polish aristocracy that was ruling over the Ukraine, and of course the Jews, because the Jews were working with the King of Poland. It was also known that the Jews were serving in the Turkish army. The Jews who had fled from Spain were readily accepted by the Turkish Empire, and so many Jews saw their alliance with the Sultan of Turkey. So for two reasons, the Jews were butchered. And in fact, the information that I have is that 1/3 of the Jewish people was destroyed by Khmelnytsky in 1648. The total population of the Jews in 1648 was 1.5 million. After Khmelnytsky, 500,000 Jews were killed. We were left with 1 million people. So this is very important to remember, because in the collective memory of the Jews and the Ukrainians, we have a Nazi-like Holocaust that most people are really not aware of. But the Ukrainians remember it, and the Jews remember it. At least I do. So in 1648, the Ukrainians fight the Polish, win their independence for a time, and then the Russians, I can't talk as a military man, seeing later that the Polish fought such a valiant war against the Turks in 1648 in Vienna, probably suffered some debilitating losses, and the Russians then saw their moment of opportunity to come in and to defeat the King of Poland. And within a period of 120 years, Poland basically was wiped off the map as an independent country. And it was not until 1920 that the Polish people arose again as a nation. The land which had been ruled by the Germans, the Austrians, and the Russians, and the new country known as Poland was created under the leadership of Pilsudski. And like I said in the previous YouTube, my grandfather fought in the army of Pilsudski against the communists. So that's something I wanted to share. I don't know what much time. What's our time now? Okay. I wanted to share a little thank you to my son for giving me the timing, because I wanted to know if I should tell the story or wait for the next YouTube. But I have to tell you a story that is very important, that many Jewish people are not aware of this history. My grandfather was 16 in 1914 when Kaiser Wilhelm's army invaded Poland. At that time, it wasn't Poland, it was Tsarist Russia. And the leadership of, under the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, had an ideology which said basically that the solution to the Jewish problem was you kill a third, you exile a third, and the remainder you convert to Russian Orthodoxy. In other words, again, another form of Nazism, another form of anti-Semitic persecution and destruction of the Jewish people. My family in Poland, my grandfather was 16 at that time, and our family was starving. When the German army came in 1914, the German army under Kaiser Wilhelm was a very humanitarian army to the Jewish people in Poland. And they gave my grandfather a job at age 16. They saved our family from starvation. They fed us, they clothed us. And it was a very remarkable thing. And my grandfather was trained in 1914 in electrical wiring, copper wiring. Afterwards, when he moved to Argentina, he opened a copper wire factory with the knowledge he had received from the German army in 1914. Why is this important? Because in World War II, when the Nazis came in, the Jews of Poland thought these were the same kind Germans of World War I, but they weren't. They had undergone a metamorphosis under Nazism and under Hitler, which was very, very destructive for the Jewish people. And the sign hanging over the concentration camps, Arbeit macht frei, work will liberate you, was something which was, for the Jewish people, a throwback to World War I, where the Germans gave the Jews work, and the Jews were liberated by the work that the German army gave them in World War I. But this time in World War II, it was the death and destruction of the Jews in the gas chambers, and it was something the Jews did not interiorize. I have to tell you, there's a man who's very dear to me. He has a radio show in Seattle. His name is Michael Medved, and he's Jewish, and I had the honor and pleasure of spending a few weekends with them in Mercer Island in Seattle. And Michael Medved, when I told him the story, he said, you know what my grandfather did in World War I? My grandfather was an officer in Kaiser Wilhelm's army, and he was deployed in Warsaw, and he was liaison to the Jewish community. I almost started crying, because what it meant was that his grandfather had to have taken care of my grandfather. And it's a very small world. And I will always be thankful to God and thankful to Michael Medved for this testimony. And I wanted to conclude this segment just by saying, Kaiser Wilhelm was the only leader in World War I who gave kosher food to the Jewish soldiers in his army. The Jews fought like lions in the German army. The Jews were disproportionately awarded the Iron Cross for valor in the German army in World War I. That's why it was so hard for the Jews to understand what was happening under Nazism and Hitler. And the Jews today need to understand today the Christians are not the enemy, the Muslims are. The Muslims might have been our friends in 1492 in Spain, but the roles have been reversed, and the Jews must understand how history changes and how the relationships with people who used to be enemies became friends, and people who used to be friends became enemies. And we will continue the YouTube in the fourth segment.